2025 is just 2 years away, and with global tensions rising and an uncertain future ahead, let's take a blast to the past and look at some of the more creative ways our endemically poor bastard ancestors disposed of their relatives' remains. Desiccation, not to be confused with desecration, is broadly described as liquid removal, and is possibly my favorite use of a dead body. This manipulation of the decaying process is crucial to many death rituals such as the famous smoked mummies of Papua New Guinea. One of the more spiritual uses involves aboriginals raising and heating the bodies over a fire, where the leftover liquids can be rubbed over young men's bodies to help pass on the good qualities of the deceased man. Going to the other extreme of desiccation is the Buddhist self-mummification practice of the Sakushinbutsu in Japan. This involved starving and dehydrating oneself while drinking a tea made of poison ivy that functioned as a diuretic. This would go on for months until the body's intestinal microbiome was cleansed and the body wouldn't rot from the inside out, but that's a video for another day. One of the more common mortuary practices was disarticulation, which was chopping the body into pieces. The example with the most utility here exists in the Mesolithic caves of Aubry des Sauteurs, where limbs were placed and regularly moved around. Going a step further, disarticulation allows one to reassemble a person, or even to create hybrid people, such as the Bronze Age body of Claude Halen in Scotland, composed of several different people. Another example is the Neolithic Anatolian caves, which were marked so that someone could return to collect the skull after decomposition, which brings us on to secondary burial. One example I know of is Bronze Age Moravians, whose bodies were left out for scavengers to eat, and their bones would be buried. The Lapa do Santo in Brazil demonstrate a more fascinating example of secondary burial, with leftover bones of ancestors long ago being burned, defleshed, being drilled with holes, and even being used as containers. A more modern example is depicted in the burial custom of Famadihana, or turning of the bones, a custom unique to Malagasy where remains are dug up, danced with, and reburied. If you're lucky, your dug up skeleton could also be used for jewelry, such as this jawbone from one of many possible societies in Mexico. Alternatively, you could have died in any one of many ancient pandemics, and buried in a mass grave used for building material, such as the people of the Sedlec ossuary in a country that no longer exists. Some of the more familiar burial practices are cremation and endocannibalism. The latter has a long history dating back to the Paleolithic, dating as recently as today. I made a video in the pilot season about the deadliest disease by percent infected called Kuru, which is spreadable through eating a dead person's brain matter. Cremation, on the other hand, does have some nifty variations, such as the Japanese ceremony of katsuage, where chopsticks are used to collect the bones after cremation. A lesser-known variation is endoimbibition, or the practice of drinking human mixtures of ash or carefully draining the fluids of a decaying corpse into wine vessels to be preserved. We even have a case in Serbia where old bones were gathered up, cremated, and then mixed into regular corpses, a case where secondary burial and cremation meet. One can't talk about mortuary practices without talking about burial locations either. Some familiar examples are the hanging coffins of the Bo people in China and the Sagada coffins of the Philippines. There's also the baby grave trees of the Tanah Toraja and Sulawesi, and the shell middens found around the world, where the dead of fish hunter societies would dispose of used shells with the dead. There's also a whole host of quote-unquote unclassified death rituals, including being buried standing up, being buried with a dead animal staring at you, and elaborate spiraling burial formations making the list. Last but certainly not least, the skulls of 2 infants who were buried wearing the skull of the other child. Clearly, the capacity for human creativity is not limited to the world of the living. If you have any more fascinating examples, please leave them down below. Thanks for watching. Bye everybody.